Hello and welcome to another short drawing lesson. This week I'm going to show you how to add a bit of depth and realism, a bit of solidity to a simple side view sketch. I'm using a car here, but it could be any object. In the first example I'll show you how to add it to something from our imagination, and then in the second example we'll have a look at how you would use a vanishing point when you're sketching from life. So here's a space buggy type thing, something simple and boxy, and so this is something we may have designed and we just want to add a bit more depth to it. It looks a bit flat at the moment. So what we can do is put a vanishing point in, and we can put that pretty much anywhere we like. The only thing I would say is that generally it's a good idea to stay within the object. You could go slightly higher or lower, but I would start to be cautious about going past the ends of the vehicle. I'll explain why later. So for now let's pop it just here. We'll just put a little cross, and that's going to be our vanishing point. So now we can use that point to work out various things. So we can draw a line to our wheel at the back there, another one at the top, and this is tangential to the sides of the wheel there, going off to the vanishing point. So we now know that the other wheel on the far side, the distant one, it's going to be the same kind of shape as that, but it needs to fit within those two lines for it to effectively be the same size as it were in real life. So that would be about that kind of size. So you can see how much smaller that shape becomes when you move it that far away. And then we can do the same for the front wheel. And this is kind of, you can do this very lightly if you're sketching with a pencil or something like that, or if you're working digitally you can do it on a separate layer. And it's the sort of thing you could do it by eye, but there's a good chance that occasionally you'll slip up and just do something slightly wrong, get it in slightly the wrong position, or maybe draw the wheel slightly too big on the far side. And once you've got a few of those things that are all slightly wrong, then the object starts to look wrong. You know, it looks like it's been in an accident, or that something hasn't quite worked, especially for a man-made object. Then things, man-made objects are generally nice and symmetrical and square and have horizontals and verticals and things. And as soon as you stray away from those, you start to hit problems. So these ones are put at the top there. They're for the corners of the roof. So we could, we're lower down, we're lower than the roof there. So we can imagine that we'd be able to see up inside that space. And at the point where the roof hits that line going off to the distance, that's when the tilt for the windscreen starts. And we can work out where the top of the dash should be as well. So this is where the roof comes down, that's where the windscreen goes, and that's where the dashboard is. So it just very clearly shows you where all of these lines should be without you having to guess. And you can darken those to show that it is the underside. We've got a little sunscreen there, a sunshade, and that's one of those things where if you guessed it you might just think, oh, it should probably be something like that, and you'd shade it in. But actually when you follow your proper guides down to the vanishing point, you can see the angle is really quite steep. So that's the true angle of that sunshade. And that's one of those things where sometimes your brain will tell you one thing, but actually it's not really science, but the construction guides from your vanishing points and things will tell you something else. This one over here, I've imagined there's some kind of roll bar frame or something over there. So it would be like this on the other side. And at that point it would tilt down and be parallel to this one here. We've got a box on the back there, so again, anything square, anything with a horizontal edge, that will all go off to that vanishing point. So there's our three-dimensional box. So we could use it for these bumpers at the ends. There's not really much to see there, but because they overlap each other, something like that. And even lastly, just for the shadow on the floor, we can even use it for that. So here's This is the front edge of the shadow, that's the back edge of the shadow, and we'll imagine the shadow that this car casts is kind of rectangular. So the ends of it, the ends of our rectangle, we can use our vanishing point for that too. So there's the shape of our shadow on the ground. I won't colour it in, that would be too boring to watch. And we move on to the next part. So there we've added a bit of depth and made it feel a bit more three-dimensional. Because those side view diagrams of vehicles and things, they're easy to do, but they do end up looking a bit like a plan or a cardboard cutout, and don't seem to, they don't have depth until you add a bit like this. So hopefully that's you can see the difference there. See, flat cardboard and 3D. And let's have a look at a few other examples. So let's go on. We've got some photos here. I was mentioning about not straying too far outside of your vehicle, and this is why. So here's a photo of a vehicle, and we are stood looking at the vanishing point just slightly ahead of the vehicle. But notice what happens to the wheels in that case. The front wheel is fairly round, and the back one has become an oval, and it's also much smaller. And that's because there's already a second vanishing point at play now, because we're outside of the vehicle. We're not looking directly at the side of it. So now we've got to think about the second vanishing point and how that scales things down as they travel off in this direction. There is always an exception to the rule. I mean, generally when you're sketching a subject, you might be this kind of distance or just a little bit further away, or maybe even a bit closer, but sort of you're usually fairly close to your subject, which means that there can be quite a lot of distortion from perspective. If you've got a telephoto lens on your camera, you can zoom into a subject quite far away. And here on this vehicle, the vanishing point is quite far away from the vehicle. But because we're using a telephoto lens, it's kind of compressing things, so you don't really see much, even though the vanishing point's quite far away from the vehicle. You're not seeing much of the front surfaces. There's not a lot of depth to it. And notice how the wheels are staying quite round. There's the perspective in this direction to the other vanishing point is hardly there at all. But thing is, you'd rarely see this in a sketching situation, because in that situation, the vehicle would probably, to your naked eye, be about that kind of size, and you wouldn't really be thinking about perspective at all. In that case, you'd just be doing your best to get a kind of basic car shape down. So, but that's not to say that this wouldn't be a fun way to draw something from your imagination, maybe. Anyway, hopefully it hasn't confused issues too much. So let's go to our second example, which is where we're working from life. So imagine we're out in the desert sketching this vehicle. We've perhaps done the basic silhouette shape and the two wheels like we did with the one from our imagination. And now at that point you want to think, well, where is the vanishing point in this actual scene? So that I can start to add the depth to it rather than just guessing. So you have to look for clues. So one clue would be the actual horizon in the picture, because you know your vanishing points are usually on a horizon line. But that isn't always the case. In this case, we're on flat ground and the car's on the flat ground, and the ground continues flat way off into the distance, so that probably does mean the vanishing point will be on that visible horizon. But if the ground's undulating and the car is tilted, then there's a good chance that vanishing point won't be on that visible line anymore. So we need to look at other things. So as before, we can see up into the underside of the roof, which means we are lower than it. And if we look at the top of the bonnet there, we can't see the top surface of the bonnet, so that means we're still lower than that as well. We can see the top surface of this wheel, which means we're slightly higher than it. So that leads me to think that we're somewhere between here and here, height-wise, which is actually where the horizon is. So I'll draw a horizon in. I'll try. I'll draw a horizon in, just roughly where I think it's going to be, that kind of height. And now let's look for some other clues. We need to know how far along this line our vanishing point is likely to be. So we need to look for things that are repeated on the near side and the far side of the vehicle. So things like the tyre. So this tangential point of the tyre here is mirrored there on the other side. So what we need to do is draw a line that touches both those 2 points and continues till it crosses our horizon. You could do this with your pencil if you're out sketching. Use it as a straight edge. Just sort of make it touch those 2 edges, see where it goes. Or you can just, after a while, you can do it by eye and just kind of guess. You need to be close. You don't need to be spot on accurate. We can do the same with the back wheel. So this kind of edge and that kind of edge. And sometimes you'll find that they line up perfectly on top of each other and everything's hunky-dory. Sometimes you'll find that one thing doesn't quite go exactly the same place. But once you've made enough of these, once you've lined up enough things, you'll start to see exactly where they're all heading and where it's likely to be. So we've got another one here. We've got these 2 fire extinguishers which look mounted the same and look the same sort. So if that point there and that point there, draw through those. And again, it looks like I got lucky with my first line, and I'm fairly confident to say that this is our vanishing point for the sketch. So we could use that now for things like the roll cage inside, these, working out the angles for things like that. Just, like the sunshade that I mentioned on our one from our imagination. All of those kinds of things, we can use that vanishing point and carry on sketching. We can use it to work out how big the wheel should be on the far side. So it just takes the guesswork out of it and means that the end result is likely to be feel a bit more accurate and solid, and it will just stop you making any dodgy mistakes. Because you'll often see this. You'll see somebody's drawn a vehicle from the side and they've seen that a wheel's poking out, so they've done that, and they've seen the underside of the roof, so they've done that, but the 2 things don't necessarily go to the same vanishing point, and it just makes the car feel slightly wrong, so it's slightly unhappy. So hope you found that useful. It's a lot of waffling and not much drawing, but it's a useful thing to know, because we often choose to draw things front on or side on because it's simple, and perhaps then we think, oh, there's no perspective at play, but actually there is still a vanishing point somewhere within that object. So it's useful to try and find it. Hope you found that fun, and let me know in the comments if you did, and subscribe and like and all that stuff, and I'll do another one soon.